Hello, this is episode 10 of The Grief of Politics. I am Joseph Carlson, and I'm here with Avin Carroll. Avin, how you doing? Good. Well, I mean, we're doing the normal chat up, but you and I both talked before this. We both have had rough nights, so we're like, right, the podcast. Yeah, I mean, this time it was my, this is my choice, and I picked Afghanistan and Iraq, kind of, because it's been in the news, obviously, how the capital fell, Kabul, and how people got out of there. And you and I have talked on the phone for weeks about this. I read Craig Whitlock's book. He works for the Washington Post. The book is called The Afghanistan Papers, A Secret History of the War. I read the whole book. I read a book, but he condensed his book into an article. Actually, I don't know if this came out in 2019, so I think he was going through this stuff, the Afghanistan Papers. These were all real documents from the U.S. government. This isn't just him going off sources. These are declassified documents. There was something called the Learning Project, and then there was it was like a Virginia Military Institute interviews they did with contractors, military, active and former military, to get like this oral history of the war. We usually do 3 articles, but this month we're only doing 1 because this condensed article that's kind of like a jumping off point to his book. It's called At War with the Truth, the Afghan Papers. This came out, obviously, like I said, in 2019. And this is like a condensed version of the book, but it's very long. And so, and it says right here that this series, which they have other links in this article, this series is the basis for the book, The Afghanistan Papers, A Secret History of the War. The book can be ordered here. There's a link in the article for the book. I read the book. It is very good. So we'll just start out since it's my topic, but I'll go to you first, Avin. What was your kind of opening statement when we started talking about this, like on the phone and everything like that? When I said I wanted to do this, what was your kind of like thesis on, I guess, the war? And to be clear, we're both civilians, but we'll get into a little bit of that later. But
so when we picked this topic originally, we had spent a lot of time on the phone talking about what was currently going on in Afghanistan, which was the very botched withdrawal. We spent quite a bit of time discussing like who's at fault or who's responsible. Although, like, you and I aren't as concerned about that as we are, like, this is
I'm concerned with it, but
flippin' debacle, right? I guess maybe I'd be better off to say it's not that we're not concerned about it, but both of us are able to see past, like, is it Biden or is it Trump? Like, we're
right.
Both able to look at, like, President Bush, President Obama, President Trump, and now Biden.
Yeah, I do like to point out to people, because you see it online all the time, the withdrawal was terrible. Biden did a bad job, but there was 3 other administrations that were involved in this. So,
and there's 3 other administrations that have had their hand in this pie to just make it the absolute shit show that it was, right?
Right.
A good friend of mine I worked with years ago lost his brother in Afghanistan. I know many, many American soldiers have passed away in this conflict. This article talks through kind of the strategy changing, and it changed again, and different administrations had different goals or didn't even have any goals. They were just sort of there.
To be clear, what I got out of the book and what people have been talking about in the issue. Sorry to interrupt your point, but
you're fine.
The idea is that we were afraid after 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
We were so afraid that this is what Bush decided to go to Afghanistan, which right there is a problem, because the attackers were, that I remember, they were either Pakistani or
Saudi,
right? And so we didn't know, when the more and more you read about this article, we didn't know really anything about Afghanistan, its people, its culture. We didn't understand about their economy. We knew very little. I don't like to agree with Bill Maher, but he had a good point that like these attacks could have been planned anywhere. It didn't matter, where these terrorists planned the hijacking of the planes. They could have done it in Germany, which apparently they did. I remember reading the 9/11 report. It's all a haze because it's very technical, but like they weren't in Afghanistan when they planned this stuff. They talked initially about doing something like this, but they were in different things getting trained. The long and the short of it is each administration basically just repeated the mistakes of the past administration. But a lot of people say that most of the blame should fall on Bush and his administration because without getting into corruption and all that stuff, this was basically, they started the ball rolling on this, and it had to be maintained even when there wasn't anything to show for it. They didn't really have any evidence. They couldn't prove anything. I've heard from sources that were in the military that maybe in Iraq Saddam had weapons of mass destruction, but that begs the question of, well, then if there was those things, why weren't we able to prove it? And things like that. Because we all know that was a sham. There's been several documentaries about, we went to Iraq for some reason. And in the book, they point out that the moment we invaded Iraq, Afghanistan literally was put on the back burner, that they started getting less supplies because it was all going to Iraq. And they said the military leaders started lying and saying, oh, yeah, we're going to use it for Iraq, but they would get it to Afghanistan or whatever because it was just ridiculous. And the amount of money that we were burning over there is truly astronomical, like billions of dollars over 20 years. But sorry, I interrupted your point because I know on the phone that you talked about, we still should have been there. We still should have stayed.
So we were talking about the withdrawal from Afghanistan and how that all went down and how ugly it was and kind of who's responsible for it. And I would definitely say, like, hey, if you're going to point a finger, right, like the person who put us there in the first place is probably the one who's ultimately responsible for everything that happened after it, to a degree.
Yeah,
right?
There's a lot of talk on the left right now about rehabilitation and how we rehabilitate people, and the fact that George Bush is trying to be seen as this really kooky grandpa right now. And there was a dinner, I'm sure you saw the clip, a war veteran that was over there yelled at him at a dinner and said, you had my friends killed, you killed my friends, there's Iraqi civilians that are dead because of you, like yelling at this dinner at him, and he got escorted out. This idea that, like, we love to rehabilitate people in this country, and the idea that George Bush did so many terrible things, and then it's like, oh, but he paints, and he's doing this fundraiser.
I mean, let's be fair on that, too, though, right? Like, that's liberal media painting a conservative in a bad way. Conservative media does the same thing.
No,
right? Like,
yeah, but I mean,
the
that's the
exact same accusation against Obama and some of the cruise
Oh,
missile
and
strikes
they
during
do.
his
They
presidency.
in that book they go over the drone strikes, which
In this book they do, but I'm talking in that media thing about painting Bush as kooky grandpa, right? Like, Obama doesn't get painted as kooky Obama.
Well,
he's the saint.
I will-
That's what everyone wants to go back to.
I will say Obama's not old enough yet. Like, when he starts having grandkids and gets old enough, there is talk on the left about the drone strikes that are still happening, and it was just in the news a month ago that they killed 10 family members, and the military commander had to apologize.
Right.
And so it's like, Obama is definitely not, but he's not old enough yet, quote unquote. The problem people have with Bush is that they're just like, the media, literally was on like CBS this morning going, yeah, look, I paint veterans now. And people are like, that's really ironic considering that you told these people to go to war and they come back broken, and you're like, do you want your painting painted? It's like, what? Like, he has a coffee table book of painted veterans, and they're like, this rehab thing, I mean, progressive, I'll say, not Democrats, but the progressives are like, what the hell, like, what is going on? Like, how do we look at this stuff? I'll say this much, like, you said it was botched. The withdrawal was totally botched. Many people have pointed out Afghans don't fight in the winter, and we should have waited till the winter to extract everybody because there just would have been less fighting. People would have bunkered down for the winter.
I mean, to get back to the point that you were making too about one of the things that you and I had talked about, I personally don't think that we should have withdrawn. The provisional government, well, not provisional, I mean, the government of Afghanistan
was terrible.
We knew they weren't going to be able to stay stable. We knew it was going to collapse.
We knew that
from the Taliban.
We knew that in 2010.
We didn't know it was going to happen as quickly as it did.
Yeah, they did.
In fact,
if you read the book, all the internal reports are like, this is not working. So my thing to you is how long do we stay? Because you're like, should.
My point on the collapse after we withdrew, it was going to be a week. We thought it was going to be a couple of months.
Oh, but
at least that's what was being reported at the time as we were getting ready to withdraw.
But then all the military leaders are like, oh, actually, all the timelines kept shrinking. They're like, oh, it'll probably be a couple months, and then it got closer, and they're like, it might be a couple weeks, and then it was 4 days or something that it.
Yeah, it was just ridiculous. And in answer to your question of how long do we stay, I mean, that's a really difficult situation at that point. My frustration isn't that we were there and we needed to get out, because we did need to get out. My frustration in it is the United States has this extremely long history. Well, I don't know if I want to say extremely long, but
I mean, it's pretty long. We can be honest. It's
the last 60, 70 years we have this history
since
nation building.
Yeah, since 1960, Cuba, that was the big one,
Yeah. I mean, and we interfere in countries all the time and it ends up biting us in the ass, right? Like Iran, Iraq, Haiti. There's all these situations where we went in and we manipulated things for our benefit at that time, but it's now created this massive repercussions in current times. And so my frustration is that so frequently, we get in, and I'm thinking specifically Vietnam. We go in, we fight this war for our causes, we decimate the country, and then it's no longer politically advantageous, and so we bail. And in Afghanistan, we didn't actually do that. Our government's actually changed hands party-wise 3 times over the course of the war in Afghanistan. And each president stayed, even though it was never very popular as a war goes, right? Initially, right after 9/11, it was because hey, we're going to go get Osama bin Laden. We're going to get Al-Qaeda, which is being supported by the Taliban.
Which is not true.
And we're gonna do this, right? Well, yeah, but I mean, at the time, and American people were really in support of that concept. And then we went to Iraq, and Afghanistan not only got forgotten by the military, it was forgotten by the press, and so it's still been covered, but it has never been a big deal because we live in the United States, and we're very much a country of out of sight, out of mind, and most of us have just been living our lives. And let's face it, over the last 20 years, a lot of stuff has happened in the United States that's commanded more attention from American people.
Right.
And the more the time goes by, the less important the war becomes, and the only people that are thinking about it are the soldiers on the ground over there and the occasional reporter that writes an op-ed or does a special or a report.
There was a shout-out later in the book. They talk about corruption. The security forces, the Afghanistan security forces they were training were siding with the Taliban. And there was a shooting of American soldiers. They got shot in the back. And it was actually a reporter in Tacoma that was embedded with some troops from Fort Lewis McChord that kind of uncovered who was killed and stuff. It just is a whole thing, Griff. I just want to read this one quote from the book, the article actually that Craig Whitlock wrote. He says, since 2001, the Defense Department, State Department, and the U.S. Agency for International Development have spent have spent or appropriated between 934 billion and 978 billion, according to an inflation-adjusted estimate calculated by Netta Crawford, a political science professor and co-director of the Cost of War Project at Brown Universities. These figures do not include money spent by other agencies such as the CIA and the Department of Veteran Affairs, which is responsible for medical care for wounded veterans. And then this is a quote, "What did we get for $1 trillion effort? Was it worth $1 trillion? Jeffrey Eagers, a retired Navy SEAL and White House staffer for Bush and Obama, told government interviews. He added, after the killing of Osama bin Laden, I said that Osama was probably laughing at his watery grave, considering how much we have spent in Afghanistan. The documents also contradict a long chorus of public statements from U.S. presidents, military commanders, and diplomats who assured Americans year after year that they were making progress in Afghanistan and the war was worth fighting. Several of those interviewed described explicit and sustained efforts by the U.S. government to deliberately mislead the public. They said it was common in military headquarters in Kabul and the White House to distort statistics to make it appear that the United States was winning the war when that was not the case. And this is another quote. Every data point was altered to present the best picture possible. Bob Crowley, an Army colonel who served as a senior counterinsurgency advisor to U.S. military commanders in 2013 and 2014, told government interviewers surveys, for instance, were totally unreliable, but reinforced that everything we were doing was right, and we became a self-licking ice cream cone. So we knew, so that's, I guess my question is, how long do we stay?
And I think, even as you're talking, right, I'm thinking to myself, how long do we stay? What would be the right amount? And I think the bigger, kind of broader question is what was our goal, right? You're talking about, we kept saying we're winning the war, but our objective in Afghanistan was to, rout the Taliban because they were helping Al-Qaeda, and now we know better.
Right.
And we wanted to get Osama bin Laden because Osama bin Laden was hiding in Afghanistan. And they were protecting him.
And they thought he was in Pakistan, and there was conflicting reports. A lot of people said that's where he is early on, and then a lot of people were like, he's not there yet. This is very early in the war.
Yeah. And so ultimately, we got Osama bin Laden. Why did we end up staying in Afghanistan? Well, I think there's a whole bunch of possible reasons for it, but ultimately, what defines a victory? What defines a win?
Right.
In Afghanistan? Because our objectives kept changing,
or we didn't have them.
But as an American citizen, what was our objective in Afghanistan after we got Osama bin Laden?
Right.
So, to that point, we probably should have pulled out in way earlier, 2008.
Well, the one thing I forgot to write down, which I'm going to do a quick search, is I don't remember when here we go. When was Osama bin Laden killed? Osama bin Laden was killed on May 2nd, 2011.
Okay. So
10 years
should that
ago.
Should have May 3rd, 2011 been the day
May
we were
2nd,
out of Afghanistan?
Yeah, May 3rd pull-out date, yeah.
Admitting we wouldn't have done it immediately, right? Because we got to coordinate and make sure.
But maybe another year or two, maybe at the most, to draw down.
Maybe.
Yeah. We got over there pretty quick.
We can get out,
yeah.
But we did a lot of building and brought in a ton of equipment over time. We got a bunch of people over there really quick, but getting all that equipment and resources and everything back. But apparently we don't care about that,
no,
right?
We left
all those helicopters and vehicles and
that was one thing I know.
Weapons.
I listened to some veteran podcasts, and they it's actually the same feed as Black Rifle Coffee, but they have 3 feeds, I think, in their podcast. I listen to them. I do enjoy. I don't obviously agree with them politically. They do talk a lot about creativity and stuff, but they have one feed in there called the Medevac podcast, which I really like. It's either corpsmen that were medics or people that have been wounded in battle. A lot of amputees. They have doctors. That's one thing that angered them was that we left so much over there that now the Taliban is using.
Well, supposedly, according to the government, it was all disabled before we left. But, like, why did we have to? Like, why didn't we just delay our withdrawal and get all of our equipment out?
Yeah. No, again,
Like,
I'm not. That's one thing I don't like about the book. But obviously, this guy's got to stop the book somewhere and publish it. He just got into the Biden administration before the book ends, and so you just have this thing of Biden going, yeah, make like the statement Biden made about pulling out, and that's kind of the end of the book.
it, and we've known for months and months and months and months, right? Like, so where Biden's getting a lot of flack is because, like, okay, fine, blame Trump. Like, he's the one that set the date. Whatever. Blame Trump for not doing anything in Afghanistan. I mean, Obama didn't, and I mean, you could argue that Bush did his job, and Obama finished it by getting Osama bin Laden.
Right, but that's a big spread. That's 2001 to or 2002, yeah, to 2011. So that's a
Right.
10-year spread of.
But again, you could argue that they were doing their job there, right?
You could,
Obviously,
you could make that argument, yeah.
I don't. I mean, again, this has been such a back burner thing for so long, and the withdrawal brought all of Afghanistan forward again. And I really appreciate that this article was written, that these papers were exposed.
They're still,
I think
if you read deep in the article, they're still in a court case to get more of these documents. This is only part of the documents that were released through the Information Act or whatever.
Right. And, I think it's a great thing that Craig Whitlock went out and dug into this, right? Like, I'm a big fan of government accountability on both sides of the aisle. We need to hold our government accountable. The American people, in my opinion, do not do a very good job of holding our politicians accountable. We have this very much short-term, like, amnesia. Like, we just forget that our politicians are self-serving assholes every election cycle and vote in the exact same people that we were cursing.
It's not about governance; it's about re-election, is what it is.
Right. Well, and it's
money,
power, and money.
Well,
right.
Can I say this? I know you and I are critical of the media, but I don't like I do understand the idea of hey, CNN made fun of Joe Rogan for using horse dewormer, which he didn't. That's wrong. He was using a prescription that a doctor prescribed in. Is it good? We don't know yet. But the media makes mistakes. But when everybody rips on the mainstream media, I look at pieces like this, where this guy for years researched this. They were involved in a court case to get these papers, and he's reading these interviews like this is journalism. This is like the Daily Wire isn't going to do this. And I don't mean politically they're not going to do this. I mean, they're not going to have the bandwidth and time to pay someone years to construct this piece and corroborate it. Like, that's not happening even on the people I listen to on the left. Sam Cedar on the Majority Report, the Minority, whatever, they don't have the bandwidth to do this. So when people complain about the media and the mainstream media, I'm like, well, what about this book? What about people that are there every day reading these things and constructing? Like, this book is grouped into years. So he had to construct a timeline through years, and if you read it, this happened on this date, and then months later this happened, and then maybe he'll do a quick aside where he'll say, well, we got to kind of go back to this. But it is, like, to craft this took obviously years, and I hate it when it happens more on the right and the left. I mean, it does happen on the left, but the right is really down with the MSM and all this stuff. And I'm like, but what is Dave Shapiro doing in a show complaining about Biden's pullout? Like, he doesn't have the bandwidth to go over this whole picture for 2 years. Like, there's just not the money in it. Like, it's exactly what's happening in content creation. They're chasing subscribers. They need to get stuff out as quickly as possible to get those numbers up. I mean, it could be a long tangent, but I mean, I really do want to push you on this, because you kept saying on the phone, several phone calls, well, we should have stayed. It's like, well, what were we doing that we needed to stay? You know what I mean? Like, what was the, you read this article in this book over and over again. We did not have a plan. And so,
Nope. And I agree with you on that, 100%. And I do, again, also agree that, we probably should have pulled out years ago, or at least had a better defined objective. But there was one thing that we were doing very effectively, and pulling out stopped that. And that is providing some level of stability for the Afghani people. We were providing opportunity for women to go to schools. We were providing a more open and free structure in society. And we were protecting the people that had allied to us, that committed to us. And we made commitments and promises to those people.
Kind of.
But on the same note, like, the average everyday citizen was better off in Afghanistan by having our troops present and keeping the Taliban scared to come into the major cities.
Well, I mean,
the Taliban was working a lot of the borders in the smaller cities and communities, and you talked about it, right? Like, he's interviewing people, and like, the average farmer in Afghanistan really didn't give a shit who was in control.
Right, but one thing they do bring out is the fact that they talked to a lot of the tribal elders, obviously there to, reach across the, to try to create a relationship, and all of them said, we're just waiting for you to leave. So, like, your presence here is great, but the moment you leave, it's all going to go back. It's all going to go back. And, like,
right.
And so, yes, you're right. We did provide stability while we were there, but we didn't improve stability. We
didn't empower them to maintain their own stability. We tried, but they didn't want to as a country. That is probably our biggest failing, is that we didn't recognize, like, the Afghan government and the Afghan people don't want to have what we are giving them. And while there is a subset of the population that really enjoyed the benefits that came around with having us there, the willpower isn't there to maintain it.
Right.
I mean, how many soldiers just ran, gave up fighting?
Yeah.
Flipped over and fought with the Taliban. Mm-hmm. Like their military collapsed.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, like, again, I'm not harping on you, but I'm saying to everybody that says we should have stayed, what was the goal and how long? Because we're already at the 20-year mark and we pulled out. How many more years? How much more money, and how many more lives? And not only Iraqi civilians, but American soldiers. Like
Afghani civilians.
Yeah, again, listening to Black Rifle, I don't always agree with them, but it is listening to them, you ask people to give their life for a cause. I saw an interview in Vice with veterans that came back, and they said, I'm going to tell my kid not to join the military. Fox News actually just this week reported that the military is reporting an uptick in suicides in the Army, and that's on Fox News. So I was blown away that Fox News, like, that came to my feed. I was like, whoa. The thing is, like, this is another way that erodes trust in another governmental body, and this idea that in the book, the military leaders kind of knew everything was failing, but they had to keep a bold face. So they go in front of the Senate or Congress or whatever committee they had to go in front of. They'd say, yeah, it's going great. And the thing is, it wasn't. And many senators, whoever they were, called them out and said, we've heard this before for years. And, it's this idea, too. I read an article. I couldn't find it. Otherwise, I was going to send it. It's very quick. But it's basically like the military is not infallible. And we can't look to them to just tell us everything we need to. We just trust them as civilians. We're like, well, you're telling us that everything is fine, and you obviously fight for a living. We've trained you to do what we want, so we're just going to absolve any kind of. But, like, I think Biden's made some poor choices in the military cabinet, but he does have a civilian that used to serve in the military. I forget the man's name, but he's now. They had to sign a waiver for him because you have to be out for 7 years to be part of the Armed Service Committee or whatever. He is now in the committee, and they talked about even more civilian oversight in the committee, like maybe have someone that wasn't in the armed services. And I know if you're former military, you're going, well, what do you know about this? It's like, yes, but, like, we're a country, and there needs to be oversight with, because if like, we just think that, like, that's a big thing in the progressive movement right now is the military budget of, like, hey, we have all this infrastructure stuff we want to do, but, like, the debt ceiling we have to raise, and, like, we want to do this infrastructure stuff, but we got to up the defense budget, and people are pointing to that, like, the defense budget's still getting an increase even though we pulled out of Afghanistan, and So like, where is that money going? If we're not at war, why do they need more money all of a sudden? Like it's this thing of like, I don't know, without going on a tangent, I just think you have to keep asking yourself, how much longer was it worth it? How many more lives? My thing is like, hey, this is terrible. The pullout obviously could have gone better, but we needed to leave as soon as possible, quote unquote. You know what I mean? As briskly as possible, because we were not getting anything. We were spending too much money, and people were losing their lives. Like, the longer we were there, obviously more deaths, not only with our soldiers, but civilians and things like that. So it's, to me, I just don't like the argument of like, yeah, we should have stayed. It's like, why? Like, we weren't getting anything we're getting nothing from our, 20 years in, if you have nothing to show for it, I guess you can make the argument, what's another 5 years or whatever, but I like to go the other way and say, no, we need to, like, we can't do this. So.
And again, the determining factor in how long we would stay would come down to, what is the actual objective? Mm-hmm. Like, what is the mission? What is the mission? Like, what was the mission? Did the mission keep changing? Was there ever a defined mission, or were we just sort of like there?
Well, at first they were like, we're not nation building, we're just going to make it stable. And then a few years in, they're like, I didn't write down the exact phrase, but they used another phrase to basically mean nation building. And then everybody's like, there was a Senate committee where like, this kind of sounds like nation building. And the military leader's like, what? No, it's not. But it was. And so that's when you get into trouble, when people in the country are like, we've never voted for anybody. Like the tribal elders are like, this is a person who's in charge. They don't have a president, and we're like, hey, you guys are going to have elections. It's like, what? And then the person that Karaz, I want to say is his name, the person that we decided, like, you're going to be the president of Afghanistan, he was involved in incredibly shady things. He apparently paid people off to vote for him, but we needed someone there. So even Hillary Clinton was like, yeah, he's kind of our guy. When people were like, yeah.
The first president.
Yeah. It's just, I would say it's a comedy of errors, but it's not really funny. Like this idea that, like, first off, like everybody said when they got there, they're like, they don't have a democracy and we know nothing about them. So why, that we tried to show people how to farm over there, and they're like, listen, we grow poppy and maybe a few other things. Like, our number one export is poppy, Mm-hmm. And when the British were there, they tried to pay people to burn fields, and then they paid more people in security to farm. So then people started doing security and they weren't farming. Like, it's just like it's insane. That's my question is like, what was the point? Even the Black Rifle people, like one of the guys was in the CIA, and he's like, he left because of it. He's like, he was in for 9 years, I think, and then was in the CIA a few, and he's like, yeah, there's nothing, we're not gaining anything, like it's nothing but they're blowing money. They're basically like, just it's to me, it's a complete waste on every level. I don't understand what we thought we were going to gain from it, what we thought we were going to get out of it. Like, so a country that produces 90% of the world's opium, are they going to be an ally in the UN? Like, what was the goal, And
the initial goal was eliminate a place with an unstable country. It's extremely corrupt, powered by drug money, that was harboring and helping to develop terrorist networks. As it was presented.
Right.
True or false, I'm not making that assessment. The other objective was finding and killing Osama bin Laden for 9/11.
Right.
But then, we get there, we destroy large parts of the country, we destabilize the country in our conflict and our war, because basically they were like, hey, it's run by the Taliban's terrible, we're going to get rid of them. And don't get me wrong, like, I don't agree with any of the governing policies of the Taliban, right? But is that our right or even our objective as a country to go in like, we don't like the way you govern, so we're just gonna kill you. Like, we don't want to be seen that way, but to some degree I think a lot of it is that's what might have been a motivating factor.
Yeah, I think there's a big thing in the progressive movement, at least I've gotten out of the progressive movement listening to and reading stuff, is the only thing that really changes people's lives is obviously just making it better, right? Getting people access to school, healthcare, like clean drinking water, food. But we think we can build like a country. And the idea is if we would have just like built a school or a few schools and educated people and maybe just, I don't know, it's even that, it's like, but that's the thing is like, that's what's going to make the difference in people's lives. You know, them having an elected official, that's not going to move the needle. You know, saying like, hey, you now have access to human rights and you can, you know, if you're a woman, you can go to school, you can learn things, you know, like it's, you know, you can drive down the street, you know, like it's, you're not going to be hassled or killed for driving, you know, you're not going to be married off when you're 12, you know, that's the kind of stuff that means more to people, I think, than having a government. You know, what does that mean to them? You know, having a governing body, that doesn't mean anything, you know, to them.
Well, you know, and you keep talking about like the tribal leaders, but that's, you know, out in the rural areas. And Afghanistan is not a gigantic country, right? Like there's not massive amounts of large cities with huge major population centers, right? Like we've got Kandahar, Kabul, couple other cities.
Those two were the big ones anyway that we're always talking about.
And in those areas, I think those are the areas where they had the most noticeable difference in the daily lives of the Afghani people. Right. When you get out into the farm country and the rural country and agricultural population of Afghanistan, they probably had very little difference that they actually noticed other than, you know, helicopters and jets and Humvees and caravans driving around and gunfire and fighting between
whatever
Taliban and Americans.
Yeah.
The change in the day-to-day life, like, yeah, government makes a difference, but it's usually at that smaller level. You know, in the case of the political system that Afghanistan was accustomed to and is moving back towards, where it's kind of the tribal leader is the bigger impact, and they're the ones kind of negotiating what's going on with the actual government, is going to make a big difference. I think one of the other really big challenges, right, is like we just wanted a government, we just wanted something there. We didn't do anything to make sure it wasn't horrendously corrupt, and the Afghan government, by all accounts, was horrendously corrupt.
Yeah, and we were making it worse because we were just dumping gasoline on a fire by just sending money over there, where people were just like, even Rumsfeld in like 2002. I'm going to read this. This is from Donald Rumsfeld, the defense secretary under Bush. I may be impatient. In fact, I know I'm a bit impatient. Rumsfeld wrote in one memo to several generals and senior aides, "We're never going to get the U.S. military out of Afghanistan unless we take care to see that there is something going on that will provide the stability that will be necessary for us to leave. Help." The memo was dated April 17th, 2002. Yeah.
And that's just it, right? Like, I think the overarching kind of objective, defined or not, was we didn't want to be there, but we didn't want to leave without making it more stable. But we did not have a plan. I mean, I'm sure if you talk to the generals and politicians that were helping construct it, they would say they had a plan. But it was obviously not one that involved the Afghani people in any constructive way. And then, you know, we helped to put leaders in position that were just horribly corrupt. And you see the same thing in Iraq too, right? There's a massive amount of corruption after we took out Saddam and they started doing elections.
Yeah.
Now, Iraq is a much larger country with a much more stable economy that has maintained a level of stability and self-governance that Afghanistan is not. And maybe that's what we were hoping, is that Afghanistan would be like Iraq, but it's a completely different group of people with completely different past.
Here's another quote. With the AFPAC strategy, there was a present under the Christmas tree for everyone, an unidentified U.S. official told government interviewers in 2015. By the time you were finished, you had so many priorities and aspirations, it was like no strategy at all. And then so Rumsfeld wrote these memos and he called them snowflakes because he would just like shoot them out, and people would say like they'd float in like white pieces of paper. So he called these snowflakes. And I have no visibility into who the bad guys are, Rumsfeld complained in a September 8th, 2003 snowflake. We are woefully deficient in human intelligence. They're basically talking about how the president's failed. The United States has allocated more than $133 billion to build up Afghanistan, more than it spent adjusted for inflation to revive the whole of Western Europe with the Marshall Plan after World War II. And then wow. There's another quote here. Our policy was to create a strong central government, which was idiotic because Afghanistan does not have a history of a strong central government, an unidentified former State Department official told government interviews in 2015. The time frame for creating a strong central government is 100 years, which we didn't have. And then someone else said, we lost objectivity. We were given money, told to spend it without reason.
Yeah, and that, just like you said, it's pouring gasoline on the fire.
Right.
So, at the end of the day, right, like, I would have liked us to have stayed. I don't like that we left the way that we left.
So, I mean,
I don't think it was necessarily a bad decision.
Do you mean stay just to pull out? Like have a more easy transition to pull out? Or do you mean like stay to nation build? That's the thing, is because
I don't want to stay to nation build, right? Like, and the reason for that is like, we're not going to create an American democracy in Afghanistan. Like, it's just not a country that's going to do that. And that's what we were trying to do, right? Because that's what we know. That's what we want. And it's just not going to happen, right? Now, they would tell you, no, that's not what we're trying to do, but it's what we were trying to do.
Right.
The reason I would have liked to have stayed until there would be some semblance of stability is
100
multifold.
years.
Right.
And not only that, but they hired people that were Afghanistan, like not like born Afghanistanis that had become diplomats and stuff, and we sent them over there, and they're like, "What are you doing?" Again, I think it was that was unnamed, but there was other people saying the same thing. It's going to take hundreds of years to show what a central government. So my question again is, when you say stay, do you mean stay to pull out, or do you mean really stay there for 50 more years so we can build a government? Like, to me, that's ridiculous, to do that.
My concern, so I'll give you a little bit more broad. So we withdraw from Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. Thousands of Afghanis that were not able to escape are being executed, arrested, tortured.
I mean, that's happening now.
Right now, that's what I'm saying. Thousands of them.
Yeah.
Like that's the price that we pay, right? Like, there is a huge human toll in pulling out. Mm-hmm. Now, there's a couple different things we could have done. One, we could have basically said, like, hey, we're leaving. Taliban, deal with it. If you try to come after us because we violated the treaty date, like, yeah, we own it, we screwed up, but, like, fight us. Come at me, bro. To quote Marty.
I think they I think they could have just probably had a better timeline.
Well, we had a long timeline. We just weren't doing anything with it.
Right.
But we'll say the Biden administration goes like, shit, like, we've got to meet this date. Like, we're not going to meet it, so we're just basically going to
do it tomorrow.
And instead of going, hey, we've got a week, we're going to do everything in a week, right?
Yeah.
Which is what we did. And then we go out to Afghanistan and we basically say, like, hey, Taliban's going to take over the country when we leave. We know it's going to happen. So everyone that wants to leave, like, we're going to take you with us and we're going to protect you.
But we're still not doing that. I mean, there's so many interpreters and things that we're allies that are trying to become refugees, and we're making it more and more difficult for those people to,
I'm not done with my point yet. I'm still going. So that's what we could have done. We could have basically been like, hey, we need to get out. The reason I'm not happy with it is because like if we had done it that way, if we'd been better planned and coordinated, like, yeah, let's pull out. Because we need to be out of Afghanistan. It's not our place to do it. And I've got a whole bunch of different thoughts as you're talking about different things and like repeating your question, but not letting me finish my answer multiple times.
Okay, I get it. Go ahead. I get it.
If we pull out in that way, then at least we get our people out. Because of the way that we have done it, because of the fact that we did not get the interpreters out, we did not get the aides out, we did not get the people that did business with Americans, like sold goods, products, and services with Americans,
right?
That are going to be tortured, killed, arrested. The women that would have wanted out that are now not allowed to leave their house without a man, that have to be covered all the time, that like would like to be out, that their families are okay with them coming out in that way, but now because the country's laws have changed, like they're following it. We're now breeding people that will hate and resent the United States because we lied to them. Mm-hmm. And they're not going to look at, oh, it was this one president or it was this one person.
It was America.
That emotion, that anger will be towards us. And that will breed more terrorists. That will breed more deaths. Not only in Afghanistan, but throughout the world, because those people are going to be deeply motivated by the betrayal that we enacted on them, because we didn't keep our word. Now, that's why I would want to stay. Now, is it idealistic? Yes. Is it realistic to actually stay in that capacity? No, it wasn't ever going to happen. The only thing that could have happened was having a better withdrawal plan. I would love to see a stable Afghanistan, and in answer to that, I'm not saying spend 100 years making a stable Afghanistan by making a strong central government. I'm saying listen to the politicians and aides from Afghanistan and let Afghanistan build a strong, stable government on their own, in their image, the way they want to, and just stay as a stabilizing force. Hey, Taliban, like, no, you're not coming in to take over this country and build it in your own image. We're allowing the people to build the country they want to build it. And if they want to build it under the Taliban, they can, but not likely. Maybe they would.
I mean,
my sense is of the Taliban that the Afghani people are like, we don't really care what government we have. Like, we're more concerned with growing our crops, selling our crops, and feeding our families than what government is in power, because that doesn't really have a lot of influence in our day-to-day life. Like, what does the government have to do, as you've said? So my opinion of it is the Taliban just really wants to be the broker in the middle of the money so they can continue to fund their own power and their own theological government, theocracy. Right. If we allowed the Afghani people to build their own government and their own image without us having our hand in the pie, and we can't help that. You know that as well as I do. We can't do that. Again, I'm being an ideologue. Like, this would be the dream world where we're like, hey, we're just going to be a stabilizing force here.
But like, why does it have to be us? Why can't the UN step in and say, hey, wait, this isn't the U.S., this is the UN, and, you know, a stabilized Afghanistan would help, you know, with
it benefits the whole world.
Yeah, you know.
Benefits the whole world. But why won't the UN do it? Because the UN is spineless and powerless.
I mean, we pay for most of the UN.
When was the UN ever effective in any way, shape, or form? They provide a place for people to get together and talk, which is good, and people will come and talk, but when has anything productive come out of the UN?
I mean, that'll be another month topic, I think, for how productive the UN is. I mean, my thing is, like...
For the rest of the world, actually, probably pretty good. I'm being cynical.
Yeah, no, I understand everything you're saying, you know, and again, this is more of an idealized sentiment, but because, in my opinion, you're looking at a 20-year track record, like, nothing has changed.
Or we didn't do it.
So then we need to go. Like, we had 20 years you have nothing to show for it. Go. You know what I mean? Like, so this idea of like, well, we should have stayed. Like like you've obviously described your position, but I hear other people say that when I talk about it. We should have stayed. 20 years, man. 20 years. We had 20 years. Nothing. You want to stay another 20? How many more people are you okay with dying? And I'm not just talking about,
Are you okay with staying 100 and actually building a strong centralized government and completely changing the social, political, and cultural structure of Afghanistan?
Right. And again, depending on how you fall just morally, maybe you don't care about people thousands of miles away from dying, but like there is U.S. troops there that are dying as well. Like it's not in a vacuum, so like, okay, are you okay with that? And then two, whenever we have a budgetary concern in the U.S., which money's fake anyway, but the idea that we got to raise the debt ceiling, or like we can't pass an infrastructure bill because we got to give that money to the military. It's like, son of a, like when, like what do you, but like you said, since everything's on the back burner and we really don't care about, unless we read about it in the paper, we really don't care about Afghanistan or anything like that, then we don't think about it, but I think that's getting back to the civilian part. If there was some kind of civilian oversight to say, whoa, how much are we spending and what are we actually getting from this money that we're doing here? Like we have bridges and infrastructure stuff we need to pay in the States. Like why are we,
And look, if we own it, if we go in there, like, look, we are nation building. The world needs a stable Afghanistan. We're going to stay until it works. If that's our objective and we own it, like, one, we can actually do those things. But no American wants to be committed to nation building, so it's branding.
Yeah, it makes us feel pretty bad with the
right. Well, I mean, and for a lot of reasons. Basically, it's how imperialistic is that, right? Like we've moved away from that type of world.
Well, we thought we did, but apparently we just waited some years, and like you said, we waited some time, and we're like,
change the branding.
Yeah, and we're nation building. It's not colonialism; it's nation building.
If we're honest about what's actually going on, what's actually happening, if we're honest about the level of willpower we have to be committed to Afghanistan, like 100%, we needed to get out. We did it the wrong way, but we needed to get out.
Yeah.
Thousands of people have died or are going to die because we did it the wrong way. And they're not Americans, so what do we care, right?
Yeah.
And I'm being facetious in that.
No, I know what you mean as an example of like, it's even more on the back burner because, yeah.
We watch the videos of people like rushing to the gates,
holding on to the tires,
holding on to airplanes as they're taking off and falling off because they're so desperate to get away from the Taliban and not wanting to live in the country in that regard. Can
I just point out too, one thing that bugged me? I'm glad some people did it. Some ex-military did it where they actually paid for planes to go over there and pick up people, which is great. Glenn Beck did, but one thing I think is really ironic about how he did is he only took Christians. Like he hired a plane and saved Christians, which I thought is a very un-Christian thing to do. To be like, are you Christian? Get on the plane. Are you not? Stay off. Like, wait a minute. Like that seems very weird. Anyway,
there was a specific reason for it, and that is because the Taliban were hunting down and killing Christians. And so they're trying to get them out of the country.
Well, I wonder, yeah, but I mean, still, if there's someone else that's like, hey, I'm not Christian, but I'm going to get shot. Can you put me on the plane? And they're like, I don't know. You don't really have a Bible on you or anything. And so,
right. Like, no, I understand that side of the argument, but I will also say that, like, the Taliban kill Christians for being
It seems
Christian,
like they just
so
kill people. They don't, like...
anyone that disagrees with them, basically.
Yeah.
Like, if you don't agree with their viewpoints on government structure, how it should work, basically, if you have a dissenting opinion and you're willing to express that in any capacity, you're going to have a bad day.
Yeah, I mean, that's my thing, is, like, it's just because it was so long, it almost was like, well, you guys wasted a massive opportunity, so we just need to literally try to move on, like have some kind of reconciliation and move on. Like there's no amount of time that we could spend there that is going to make it any better because we've already spent 20 years and we've already seen what's happened. All the money we've blown, all the
I disagree
lives
with you on that. If we had the willpower to commit to an actual objective that was clear and defined and that like we actually followed through on that, I think that there is a timeline where it could get better. We just weren't going to do it.
Yeah. And I mean, again, would the American public put up with the, like, if somebody, and plus it's hard too, like in the States, like we've talked about all the time, administrations changed and people get reelected. So like, how do you come up?
Which was the point I was just about to make. And actually, ironically, this is the situation. But like, if we were China and we operated like China, we would accomplish what we want to accomplish. Oh. And what's happening? Afghanistan and China are shouldering up to each other.
Yeah.
And China will play the 100-year game because that's what China does. Yeah. Because that's what they've done.
Yeah, that might have to be another topic, is because Taiwan's in the news again. And it's really sad because I read all this kind of stuff when I was over there 20 years ago. It's like the same argument where I'm like, God, are they just republishing old papers? Because these are all the same arguments I've read. I mean, so in closing, I mean, like you said, we definitely just needed a plan. Oh yeah, close the book on the whole thing for audio listeners, which is the only way.
The book isn't closed though. There's so much more information that's going to come out assuming they win their lawsuit and they get even more data that comes out. Like, this is just a giant shit show. I love the United States. I love our country. We provide.
I mean, I live here. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool to live here. Yeah.
To our citizens, to the world, like, we provide a lot of good in the world. We provide a lot of benefits to our citizens, and really, honestly, the capitalism that everyone in our country loves to hate so much has lifted so many people out of poverty and starvation and desperation that, like, I don't even know if it could truly be accurately measured. However, on the flip side of that, I am not a believer in American exceptionalism. Like, we screw up, we make mistakes, we do dumb shit.
I think it's really...
Administrations change all the time.
Yeah, I mean...
So, like...
As with this and a lot of other stuff, I think you're seeing lately, like, that's really biting us in the ass. Like, the whole idea of American exceptionalism. Because if you think that you're different than everybody, but you keep making the same mistakes, there's a big discrepancy right there with how people live their lives. I mean, that's my thing, is like, this just this is probably one of the best books I've read on government oversight, and then not that I've read tons, but recently, I'll say, and then just, it was so depressing to read. And I do want to point out, this is the grief of politics, the amount of people that died and the amount of money that we spent to continue this effort when so many things in this world, in this country, could have been fixed, like water. In Flint, Michigan, they still have lead in their pipes. Like, there's like infrastructure problems, roads problems. Like, all this stuff could have been diverted.
We just owned our shit,
right? And we could have fixed all this. It's terrible. So, I mean, I don't think I really need to tie this back to grief when like thousands of people have died.
Let's just be honest about that, though, Joe. Let's say we did pull out of Afghanistan after Osama bin Laden was killed. Say we were out in 2012.
Yeah, May.
That money wasn't going to go to Flint.
No.
Because it was corrupt politicians who hid it, and it only came out after years and years and years of complaining when someone finally listened enough to do some research and figured it out.
Yeah.
Because people suck. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, individual people that are our friends do amazing, wonderful, beautiful things. But on the flip side of it, those same people that you love have broken hearts, have lied, have stolen, have hurt. Because we're selfish. We want what we want.
Yeah, I mean,
when you give people power, also, what do?
That's another great trick that I've noticed. Not even conservatives, but just like the right-wing commentators have done, like Tucker Carlson and Ben Shapiro, like all those people. The idea that if you are critical of something, then you're all of a sudden anti-American. Like, if you're critical of the military and say, hey, man, they screwed up, it's like, oh, so you don't believe in our country. It's like, I didn't say that, Or right. Like, hey, I think we could have better health care for people. It's like, oh, so you want to be a communist. Right. You're like, no, I didn't say that. Like, I just want people to have access to health care,
Yeah, let's sit down and critically evaluate and improve.
Yeah, like, doesn't mean I hate our country. Like, just because you critique something doesn't mean you find it useless. Like, you critique things to make it better, There's tons of stuff in our life that, like, we've either redone or changed because we're like, well, this isn't the way we do things. That's the way we did things back then. This is how we do things now. You always have to reevaluate and reassess things to make them...
In pieces like this, like the eye-opening effect of seeing behind the curtain of what was actually going on in Afghanistan and the government, what level of information they had and knew versus what was actually done and said to us, and then done in actual action, should really wake people up to remembering that, like, we we, the people, are the power center in our country, and we allow our politicians to wield the power that we give them in ways that we don't agree with, because we're too damn lazy to read a book like this, to read an article like this, because we're too busy, because we're trying to, work 2 jobs to pay our bills.
Oh, that's another episode.
Right? Like we could go down that route. The point I'm making on that is like, we as the American people have given sort of tacit approval to allow our government to do this kind of stuff, and it's only going to get better if we are actively involved in it. And part of that is being willing to be critical of the mistakes that we've made, without tearing the whole system down. And I do agree with you. There's a lot of conservative commentary that has this like, oh, well, like, you don't support the police, you're not a patriot. Well, no, like, this part of policing is wrong. Like, we need to fix this. Like, police are civil servants, and so very often they are heroes in what they do. I think police officers are some of the greatest unsung heroes in our country. We don't hear so many of the day-to-day stories of the good that they do, and we only see what they do bad. But we need to own when
they do something
there's a bad cookie, and we need to fix the system when there's a broken process. And I'm a very firm believer. I think the greatest transition in my life as a human being was the day I realized that I could own my mistakes and the things I did wrong and not hate myself and grow and move forward.
Yeah. I mean, I just want to put it out there for if anybody's conservative that's listening to this, the 4 people. I actually didn't check the metrics last time or before we recorded, but the idea that you critique something doesn't make you inherently an enemy. Just because I don't think the police are perfect doesn't make me hate the police. I want the police to change.
To be better.
Yeah, just because I want people to have access to healthcare. And I just want to point out, I believe in government healthcare because it's working.
Joe, you're a socialist.
I know. Exactly. See, that's what the argument becomes. And it's like, listen, if every other country can figure it out, why can't we figure it out? Like, we're just like, well, it's just totally impossible to figure this out. It's like every other country has figured it out.
Every other country hasn't figured it out. Look at their systems. They're all broken. They all have a major flaws.
Well, good. Then we can look at all that data and go, what'll work for us? Like, nothing's perfect, but it's like, I think...
Except Japan.
No. Well,
Japan's social medical program is cited as probably the best in the world. Well, but it's because of the Japanese culture.
Oh yeah. Anyway, again, there's a grief of politics. This is episode 10. I don't think I need to tie this episode back to grief. Like I said, I mean, people died. We lost tons of money. And then me, which I don't know when it's going to happen, but I already talked to Avin about this, so I'll talk to everybody. And I'll actually probably talk to my therapist a little bit more. He has some strong thoughts. Like, he's obviously, I think, in his 70s. And I want to see if he'll be on the podcast because he's been talking a lot about what America means to him. And I want to see if he'll be on the podcast to talk about that because... I think it would be important to hear his perspective on how he feels things are going. And he is obviously well educated because he got his degree in psychology or whatever and has been an active therapist for a while. And so I want to have him on the podcast. I don't know when. I don't know what his time frame is looking like. He is semi-retired, so there's many times where he is gone because...
Joe, does he believe in social medicine? Government medicine?
I think he does, yes.
Yeah, he's a socialist. We don't want him on the show.
Yeah, I know. That's the one thing where I'm like...
I'm being...
No, I know. It's the one thing, the moment... I always see those debates, and the moment that comes out of somebody about let's talk about public health care, and so you're a socialist, I'm like, there we go again. Like, we're never going to get anywhere with this. So, but Avin, are you ready to... What are we going to talk about next month? So it's your choice next month. Have you decided? We always talk about like 4 different topics that we're going to talk about, and we have... I know what my next topic is, but what are you going to talk about? Have you decided what you're going to talk about?
I have not, and I'm notorious for this. Last time I actually knew what I wanted to talk about because it was a big deal, but this time around I really don't. I don't know.
So it'll be a surprise, is what you're saying?
Which means you'll probably find out like a week before.
Right.
Yeah. But the one thing I will say in my defense, very South Parkian of me
to do it
because it means that we're gonna.
But it all comes together, man.
Really
You and
relevant.
I had we had busy nights last night. We had busy mornings, and we're here doing the podcast. Yeah. So, Avin, is there anything you want to plug before we're out of here?
Just like I do every time, check out my website, youragentguide.com.
Oh yeah, you sent me a magazine. It was very good.
I did.
So my question is, those magazines, pretty good recipes and stuff. Some of them were good. Some of them like pumpkin lasagna. What? But some of them I was like desserts. This is great. So do you buy every issue of that and like hand them out, or can people go somewhere to purchase those magazines if they're in the Washington area? I'll say the Washington State. You got to order them.
No, it's exclusive content. I send them
I got
out
exclusive content from you. That's pretty cool.
Yep, it's exclusive content. I send them out to anyone that's interested in getting those, just as kind of a marketing reminder.
Are they
right? As
quarterly?
a real estate agent.
Are they quarterly, or is this just a one and done thing that you sent out?
They're available every other month. I will probably only do them quarterly just because they are not inexpensive.
Right.
But the quality is really
They're really
high.
good.
The content is exclusive.
This is a political podcast, but it was a very good magazine. Your face you have a good photo on there, and my wife and I did. I mean, we're friends and everything, but I did like the recipes and stuff in there. Some of the tips. I didn't like some of the decorations. Anyway, it's a good magazine if you're looking for tips. Some of the stuff in there, I'm like, I don't like those hat lights. They did some weird hat light thing in there, and I was like, I don't like that.
And the idea of the magazine, right, is it's related to housing.
Right.
But it's providing actual value to people, and that's ultimately what I want to do. Right?
Oh, we should probably. What is the name? What is the name of the magazine? You probably should get that out there. I know mine's in the other room. I don't know where it went.
Home Matters.
Oh yeah, Home Matters. Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know why I had a brain fart on that, but yeah. So I'm glad you got it.
Yeah.
And the whole purpose of that, right, like plugging what I want to plug, youragentguide.com. I'm a real estate agent. Mm-hmm. The big driving force behind getting my real estate license is when I worked as an administrator for a real estate team, I realized that there are a lot of kind of fly-by-night real estate agents. 87% of agents fail in their first 5 years or less. Which means that there is a massive amount of inexperienced, non-professional, uncommitted agents out there that people are working with, and they're leaving money on the table in every transaction as a buyer or seller, and I just want to help people find that.
Yeah, you want to find somebody that's good for you and your values and stuff.
A good fit for you, that is a professional, that's going to stick around, that's committed to real estate as their profession, who knows your market, who knows the law, and will negotiate ferociously on your behalf.
Right. Yeah. So, if you're in the Washington area, reach out to Avin and get one of his magazines and check out all of your realtor stuff. Because I did like the magazine. I was like, oh, man. Because you asked for my address, which I thought was weird because we usually just FaceTime each other. And then I was like, oh, cool. This is great. It was good. Yeah, I mean, as far as me, again, this is my second podcast. The other podcast, Gaming with Grief, with Joseph Carlson, that hits every Monday at 7 a.m. every week. I think I'm on episode like 124 or 125 this week. It's just kind of a slice of life episode. It's not really grief-filled. My wife and I and a friend of ours beat a game together, and it was a terrible game called Dark Alliance. But we got it on Game Pass, and we beat the whole thing. So we're going to talk about how it was a great experience to play with friends, but a horrible game that was unresponsive. And but we made some laughs. So I usually talk about grief in games, like games that are either about death or the acceptance of death or some kind of process of death, but this is just kind of a slice of life episode is coming up, and then you can go to...
And the grief of this episode is just the experience of playing the game.
Yeah, it is really, because the whole time we were like, this game, my God, this is terrible. One of the enemies was named Kelvin, because there's a location named Kelvin Karn that this guy's named after. He's this big beast, like Yeti thing. We just called him Kevin. Kevin was really mad, and we beat the crap out of Kevin. It was really funny. But, yeah, you can write to Avin or I at gwgpodfellows@gmail.com. go there and write us and let us know it's about what episode it's about and that it's for the grief of politics. That way we don't I don't delete your whatever, or I understand what it's about. I think I'm like 100, like I said, 120 episodes into that. Haven't got an email yet. We're 10 episodes into this, haven't got an email. It'd be cool to get an email to read something over the air. That'd be a great segment to add to the show. So anything else, Avin?
Give us your opinion. We want to hear it.
Yeah, anything else before we turn it off?
Yeah, to those people that have been listening, like I said, we'd love to hear from you. Yeah. Please send us an email. Thank you for listening. We do appreciate it. Hopefully,
the three of you, we appreciate it.
And enjoy
reasonable discussions about politics. That even when Avin and I disagree, we don't.
Socialist. I mean, sorry.
You had a burp there. That was weird. You cut out.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, I think we'll say goodbye, and you guys have a good month, and we'll see you next month.